Hello and welcome back to the Start a Glamping Business podcast. We've got a bit of a foodie episode for you today, which I'm sure will make some people in the audience happy. We have got John Griffiths, who is the founder of Outbound Kitchen, a food and beverage management and development company that specialise in outdoor hospitality. So we've got a lot of good insights today for anyone who's thinking of doing food and beverage on their glamping or outdoor hospitality project. So John, welcome. We're going to dive into your background and your company in a lot of detail in this episode, but first of all, could you just give us like the 10, 15, 20 second summary of what Outbound Kitchen do and how they help people in this space?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Outbound Kitchen is, as you mentioned, a food and beverage development and management company that's focused on outdoor and experiential hospitality destinations. So we help operators and developers to integrate food and beverage from everything from the development of the site planning all the way through any type of design development process. We work with municipal clearances, when you need to get through the process to develop that. We go through R&D processing all the way through management long term. So we can literally take you from ideation to development and then help you manage that property long term if that's something that you need. So we really feel like we're a full service operator.
And you've got a pretty interesting background that's obviously led you to be qualified to do something like this. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. Well, I'm a chef by trade. So I worked for a number of years in, fine dining restaurants across North America. I've worked in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and grew that role into multi-unit development in hospitality and hotels. And what happened was about 3-4 years ago, started spending a lot more time consulting on restaurants and operations in some of the far-flung destinations. And the pandemic kind of propelled that a little farther. All of a sudden, our consulting work wasn't in San Francisco or Chicago during the pandemic. It was in Jackson and Vail and all these small mountain towns. And so we got closer and closer to all of this, outdoor hospitality that was starting to happen. And I've always been a big advocate of the outdoors. I'm an outdoor athlete myself, snowboard, rock climb, dive. If it's outdoors, I'm involved in it. So taking those two passions of, food, high-end food service and the outdoor environment was just kind of a natural dovetailing as we started to explore this space. And it was very organic in the growth. And now over the last 18 months, we've really focused almost exclusively on developing our growing business in the outdoor and experiential platform. So it's been really exciting, and we just love the ability to kind of engage in this area because food is so much about where you are and what you can experience through that. I mean, as a chef, I travel and I view the world through food wherever I go. And I think more and more people are coming into that, even with domestic travel in the US. It's such a diverse country that there's so much to explore.
Yeah. And what in particular draws you to outdoor hospitality and the outdoor space in general?
Yeah, well, I think it's, a lot of just the dovetailing of both passions, right? I grew up in an environment where I spent my youth camping and backpacking, and that grew into more and more outdoor activities. And when you think about, what outdoor experiential hospitality does is it helps people get farther away from the commercialization of some of the resort areas that we have in North America, right? People are really, when they look to these outdoor and experiential destinations, they're looking for authenticity and immersion in that environment, right? And so we really love that because food and beverage can play such an intimate part in that experience. Because people, they don't really want to go out and sit in busy restaurants and so forth when they come to these destinations. They're kind of looking for a little bit more of seclusion, right? They want to be, a little bit more intimate in what they're doing. And so by bringing food and beverage to that customer, you can really amplify the experience that they have when they visit your resort.
Yeah, and I've talked on this podcast with a few different guests and with Connor Schwab in particular about the benefits of adding an F&B program to a glamping or outdoor hospitality operation. And there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense. So could we just discuss some of the reasons why a glamping operator should be considering offering food and beverage to their guests?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one of the first ones isn't even financial, but when you think about hospitality, right, we are in hospitality, and hospitality is so much more than a transaction, right? I think that while, the outdoor hospitality world is still fairly new, that the point is we're starting to reach the point where providing exceptional accommodations isn't going to differentiate your brand anymore. You need to start to reach customers that are looking for more, than just a nice accommodation. And when you bring F&B team members into your program, your resort, these people are trained in hospitality. They're trained in how to greet guests, engage them, create experience that is so much more than just transactional, right? And they're going to increase the number of touch points that you as an operator have with your customer to ensure that your guest is having an exceptional experience. If you don't have food and beverage operators on staff, when are you going to engage your guests? When they check in and then when they check out? The entire time in the middle, you have no idea how good or poor their experience tends to be. And food and beverage operations can provide a lot more impact in that space. And when you think about financials, there's just a lot that we can kind of dive into throughout this podcast. But you tend to see some significant lift both in the potential ADR of your resort as well as the revenue that you get from food and beverage tends to mimic a lot of hotel and resorts, which are in the 20 to 40% range of daily room rates.
Yeah, and so I mean there's a whole lot to dive into there. Obviously, with glamping, there's always we always discuss like the balances versus of really sort of hands-off luxury escapes where you're not bothered versus more hands-on hospitality centric sort of guest touch point kind of hospitality. And definitely when you're talking there about what the F&B programs can offer, it's definitely the latter, and it is almost that more sort of traditional sort of close touch with the guests, and that's something that not everyone goes for. So we had last week I recorded it. It was probably about 2 months ago that when this one comes out. We had Stephen Molden of Getaway, who are very much on the sort of will leave the guests alone side of the spectrum. But for those who maybe want that bit of a closer touch and more of a sense of traditional warm hospitality, food and beverage is a great way of offering that, right?
Absolutely, and I think you're right. There are some models out there where people do seek that full seclusion, but we found that even in a lot of those models, people still need to be fed, and in some of those locations, there's not a lot of options around there. And it's kind of an anecdotal story, but one of the things that really kind of spurred my interest in this space was during the pandemic, we were working on a project and we decided to spend a few days at a glamping resort we'd found, and they had no F&B. And it was one of the first spots I'd actually stayed at. And obviously I'm a chef and I'm capable of cooking. And so our group had, really good meals, and these people at a site near ours came over and said, "Hey, where did you get all the food? We just got in. We didn't know there was no food around. Like the closest town is like 40 minutes away. Is there anything we could do? Like if we went and got the food, could you like help us cook it?" I was like, wow, there's really like people show up to these things and they just don't really understand that they're looking for seclusion and they actually have it, So I think there's always an opportunity. We don't like to say that food service should be a convenience. We really think you should develop it with intention and purpose, but there is just a necessary element that some visitors just need food around,
Yeah, and so there's a wide spectrum of people who listen to this podcast, and so some will want to start a very small glamping tent operation, for example. Others will want to start a large hundreds of unit resort style options. Obviously, you're going to be wanting to offer different things for those different types of operators. So can you just talk us through some of the different options, maybe from the sort of the easiest route into food and beverage, the sort of the one targeted at the smaller operations where maybe a full like restaurant doesn't make sense, for example, all the way up to the high end large resort offerings. Can you just talk us through some of the different options that resorts of different sizes may have available to them?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's, definitely size has something to play into that, but there's a lot of factors that we see kind of contribute to successful food and beverage programming. And we kind of have like a little bit of a Goldilocks zone that we find where food and beverage tends to be most successful. And that tends to be geographically when you're 30 to 100 miles from a population center or a small city. Is a really great window. It gets you close enough that you're going to be able to staff your operation if you need to, as well as get deliveries on a consistent enough process to support, fresh food service. And then you want to have an ADR we tend to see of about $150 at a minimum. And then you want to have annual occupancy of over 75%. So you want to make sure you don't have too big of a gap, like a really long winter season or whatever, where it tends to really throw off your ADR, because you want to make sure you have that certain critical mass that's necessary for any food service to be successful, whether that's a retail establishment that you want to develop where you're just going to resell food from a distributor, packaged foods for guests. Or you might want to have a third-party origination program, which I'll talk to in a second, or you would go all the way to like a full-service restaurant or cafe model. So, the retail element can be any variable, it can be, I should say, multiple parts of, just retail, as well as having, some of this third-party origination. And that could be developing programs with local distributors or regional distributors, and you're just basically selling like a small grocery store. Now, we like to incorporate a lot of regional and local elements to that when we do programming, because we feel like that really connects customers to the area where they're visiting, and we find a lot more impact in retail when you can provide a connection to the locality when you develop that. And then third-party origination is probably the bulk of what you might see when you're starting to start out. You want to try and offer maybe a caterer to come in a few nights a week to deliver food that could be packaged, right? People could order that in advance. You could stock it in your retail establishment as well. You could also bring in a local chef. We do residencies at some resorts where we'll, manage a relationship with a local chef or a series of chefs to come in and lead dinners, in that operation, maybe during peak season, maybe on the weekends, whatever that may be. And that, again, it helps to develop that hospitality. Guests start to interact with each other. They interact with the resort. They interact with the community. You're building connection with the community, right? The business community locally is something you really want to embrace when you're starting out one of these operations. And this is a great way to kind of ease into that model. And when you work with a third-party origination program, you don't need to have a full, commercial kitchen available to them. Usually you just need to provide a basic, kitchen type space for them to finish or set up. And then the seating area, whether that's going to be just fair weather and outside, or if it's going to be something that's covered, or, maybe it's another, larger tent structure, whatever you might do, depends on your location. But that gives you an opportunity to really start to engage. And from that point, you can start to understand, what are your guests looking for? What are the things around you? Are you in a winery-rich region where people are spending the day, going to wineries and tasting, and they want to come back and have one of those more elaborate dining experiences? Or are they more active? Are they out adventuring, doing things, and they want to come back and have something that's maybe more nourishing and satisfying, right? There's a lot of things that you can start to think about with F&B and how it can tune you into what the customers are doing when they're away from your resort. And then the third one that we mentioned is full service. So, you don't have to be the largest operation to be successful in full service. You can be a smaller location. We still tend to like to see about 20 units at the low end of that. But there are some that we've sent proposals out that were as small as like 12 or 15 units. But those tend to be ones that are also focused on more of a holistic experience. So that food and beverage might be an all-inclusive experience, right? Because you need to kind of build a baseline of revenue that will support your food and beverage, right? If you don't have a significant amount of critical mass. And those are anything from like, restaurants that are more quick service, where you might just, have people come up to a counter. You see models where it's just a, food truck, type environment, and it's attached to a tent or some dining area, and it's very limited menus. When you start to get into this, again, you don't have to look at full service or a restaurant environment being something where you have to build an actual restaurant like you'd see in a city, right? There are a lot of modular approaches to developing these programs that can provide, the experience that the guests want. And we also find that when you're dealing with outdoor hospitality destinations, customers don't look for menus that are as big and broad as they might have in a restaurant in a town or a city or back home, right? They're generally comfortable with menus up to 40% smaller than they would normally dine in, right? So they just want something that's nice, that's, feels fresh and is hot, right? Or cool if it's a beverage in that environment. So it's really just focusing on what the guests are doing, what they need, and providing that limited service. If you try to do too much, oftentimes that's where you find the waste and the inefficiency that leads to some of these myths about food and beverage never making money.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening. This is just a quick note to say that this podcast is brought to you by Glamptex North America. And what we do is we help you through the process of starting a glamping business no matter what stage you're at. So if you need to find a property, we'll tell you where the most suitable area is to start your glamping business. If you have a property, we'll look at your local zoning code and tell you how likely you are to get your project off the ground according to the zoning rules and regulations in your local area. We'll also give you a really good roadmap of permits that you'll need and regulations that you'll need to be aware of to get your glamping business off the ground. If you need financing, we'll introduce you to our range of financing partners and do you a feasibility study that will give you some really solid financial projections and market analysis that will allow you to acquire the funding that you need. If you need glamping units, we'll talk you through your options and introduce you to one of our trusted manufacturing partners to ensure that you're looked after throughout the whole process. If you need a site design or if you need permits to move forward with your project, we've got architects who will do all your drawings, make all your arguments, and essentially allow your dream to become a reality. The list goes on and I don't want to bore you, so I'll let you get back to the episode in a second. All I'd say is that Glamptex North America are the people to speak to about starting a glamping business in the US or Canada. So if you're even thinking of starting a glamping business, just get in touch with us at contact@glamptech.com or 646-586-2330. All the details are in the description, and no matter what stage of the process you're at, we will be able to help, whether it's doing something ourselves or pointing you in the right direction of our partners. Just let us know that you came from the podcast and we'll see about doing you a little discount along the way. So thanks for listening, and I'll let you get back to the episode. So a lot of people listen to this, you know, they might know a lot about glamping after doing a lot of research. Maybe they've read some of our blogs or listened to the podcast. You know, I'm sure there's some people out there that listen to this, and so you know they might have a decent knowledge of glamping, but when it comes to food and beverage, that knowledge, it just doesn't, they just don't have it, and so they might be concerned that, you know, doing something like this is going to cost a load of money, be really difficult to run and manage, etc. Obviously, you know, the idea is that they'd bring someone in like you to sort of help them through that process. But could you just tell us a little bit about, you know, how much additional work it takes to set up and maintain a food and beverage operation? Obviously, you know, there's different types as we've just established. But you know, let's talk about maybe that third party sort of integration that you mentioned, where you maybe bring in external chefs 3 or 4 times a week or something like that. How much sort of time and cost does this add on to the setup process and the ongoing process?
Yeah, so the cost is going to, like any upfront cost, is going to really depend on what you're looking to provide for the guest to dine in, right? Are you in a situation where you need to provide for inclement weather? You know, do you want to provide for 365-day service? Or are you just trying to find something that maybe you're going to do through, you know, the peak season of your location, right? And you're willing to, you know, have the guest out, you know, under the sun or under shades or maybe under a tent structure, whatever that might be. So there's a lot of relativity to the upfront cost of that. And again, when you talk about the food service facility that third-party operator needs to be within, you know, again, it just usually needs to have like covered surfaces, you know, it has to have water, sometimes heating equipment, stuff like that that's available. It can be very variable depending on where you're located. We've done one in Utah where it was, you know, totally outdoors, and they just ran some sinks. We had a pergola top on top of this deck, you know, wood-fired stove, wood-fired grill, a little bit of table space, you know, and they were able to lead some really exciting, you know, nightly dinners through their season there. But you can provide a little bit more or less depending on what you're looking for in that experience. And when it comes to managing these relationships, that is a little bit more where the labor and the effort comes into, because you have to understand that, you know, a lot of the resorts that we work with were in these beautiful spots that tend to be fairly remote, right? So the local community may not have the same expectations from a food and beverage standpoint as you might want to provide. So you're trying to bridge that gap between what the everyday consumer, you know, in this small town might eat, and then what you want to provide to your guests. So depending on how much of a gap that is, you know, if you're a higher end luxury spot, you're trying to elevate the experience a little bit. You know, what we do is we come in and we manage that experience with you. We help work with local caterers or chefs to give them everything as detailed as like the recipes and the menus, and we manage that relationship to ensure that, you know, you're getting the caliber of product, the consistency, the on-time delivery of that product that you need, because those are the things that tend to take a little bit of effort, because you do have to kind of manage those things a little bit more week to week, day to day. But with technology that we use, getting into your reservation system, understanding, forecasting of what your occupancy is going to be, there's a lot of things that we can do to help mitigate some of those hurdles that you might have in the day-to-day management of working with another vendor like that. But we find them to be pretty successful because, again, people want to experience the local food, whatever that is. It could be as simple as like barbecue that might be local or whatever it might be, or it could be more elevated, but they really enjoy that experience. So we love to kind of connect with those local chefs, those local caterers, and give them that opportunity to connect with your resort. And sometimes that grows into a much more substantial relationship. And sometimes those operators that come in third party end up being your operator when you decide to go full service food and beverage. Say, okay, well, let's just build the walls around this thing, or bring in a food truck kitchen and develop that. And we're going to operate, and you can operate it, and we can work through the lease program, whatever that might be, or profit sharing model. And those are all things that we can help develop and work through on the part of the operator to make sure that you're getting the right lease negotiation, you're getting the terms, you're getting all the expectations from that vendor that you need to deliver the service to your customers.
Yeah, and so obviously there are ways to manage it and minimize the workload, but at the end of the day, it does add time and cost to the setup and operation of a project. So it's got to make sense financially for anyone to even consider it. So tell us a little bit about the financials behind food and beverage. Again, obviously they're going to vary depending on what level of program you do and the size of the project, etc. But so what kind of effect can introducing a food and beverage operation into a glamping project have on the bottom line?
Yeah, so we tend to see, like, when you talk about the basic retail marketplace kind of model, which is really nothing more than repackaging food or selling it from a distributor, right? Just creating that small little grocery store market, gear shop kind of lodge environment. We tend to see that floating around 5 to 20% of ADR, right? Is generally kind of where we see that as our target spend. And it can be a little bit more profitable because you can inject some of the third party operating into that, right? You maybe have that marketplace, and then you have a local caterer that might bring in, packaged sandwiches, or, meal kits can be very lucrative when developed, right? So we see those can easily burst another 5 or 10% to that number. But generally, food and beverage as a whole, we see 20 to 40% of ADR. If you're using like RevPAR as more of a model, you'd probably discount that depending on occupancy a little bit, right? So it might be more like 20 to 30%. But food and beverage overall, we tend to see pretty profitable. And our models from a bottom line on the food and beverage tend to run anywhere from 20 to 30% of profitability, right? So that's all net operating income.
Okay. And if you're a glamping operator, let's say you've got a 25 unit glamping site using a mixture of tents and hardwood structures. You're charging $300 a night. You're in a good location, 40 minutes from a decent sized city. Everything looks great, and someone wants to implement a food and beverage operation on that site. What are the kind of things? How would they go about? And you can include your services in this as well. How would they go about creating a menu of food, of drink, a program, whatever it may be? How do they go about like sort of setting up and implementing that food and beverage operation?
Yeah, sure. So, that's basically what we do. So it's hard to say, so I just explained it from first person. So, and if an operator wants to do it,
let's say you're the operator in this situation. Yeah. You own a glamping site, and yeah.
So when you're developing the location, you want to try and get into that process, as early in the development of your resort as possible. But let's say you've already got the operation up and running, and you're like, we want to add it now that we're full, people are demanding it, we want to build it. So you need to go out and find an architect. You need to find interior designers to design the space, unless you can do that yourself. You need to find equipment manufacturers or wholesalers to buy the equipment, right? You need to design the kitchen spaces and the dining room areas like that. These are all things that we do, right? We go through this process with you to make sure that it fits with the design and the aesthetic of the resort, and then developing the menus and operating procedures, et cetera. So you've got to develop training programs for your staff. You need to, find distributors. Who can you buy from? Are there local farmers or local ranchers that you can get meats from? You need to build relationships with your local and regional, wholesale distributors. So those are the people that bring all the, groceries and pantry items to you, like your flour, sugar, beverages, alcohol. If you're going to engage in that, you'll need to get licenses for food and beverage from your local municipalities. There's a lot of things that go into developing the full service, which is why we have a business. But once you get through all that process, you can, once you get it up and running, if you want people to, we always like to have operators be involved in the process, because the synergy between food and beverage and the resort really needs to be strong for it to be really optimized, right? If you have a third-party operator on there, it's kind of like the concessionaires at like a national park or whatever. It doesn't really feel connected sometimes, right? So you want to make sure that as an owner operator that you have some involvement in that process, so that the employees recognize you if you're a smaller operation, or at least that they are trained in the same way that any other staff that you might have on the facility are, right? So that there's a lot of synergy and interaction, that the guest feels like it's a singular experience for them.
And when it comes to creating the actual menu, presumably you want to use local produce if you can. You want to make sure the menu aligns with the general feel of the experience that the glamping site is looking to create. What does the brainstorming session look like when you're trying to come up with, okay, we're going to serve this, this, and this. These are the drinks we're going to have available. How does that process look like?
Oh, that's the fun part. I mean, that's really like the best part of the job, right? Is you're sitting down, you're like, you just get to be creative, right? You get to look at, okay, well, what do people do? I mean, there's certain technical things we'll look at, right? We look at what the competition is around you. What are people, what are the types of options that a guest might have in the nearest town or city, right? What do we feel like the activity level is? We talked earlier about understanding what the guests are doing when they're not at your resort. Are they out adventuring? Is there some activity? Is there sights that they're seeing? What kind of interaction are they having outside of here? Because that will play into what you might want to offer in your restaurant space, right? And then it's a lot about the understanding of the client too, right? Is this a younger demographic? Are they more focused on health and nourishment? Is this a wellness oriented location, or is this more high energy, high impact? Are you one of these, we've done projects that are the remote ski lodges, where they have to have all that food flow in, but it's a very specific demographic. People are there for a specific reason. So understanding that will give you a lot of intention behind your food and beverage program. And from there, like I said, it's really focusing on what the best options are for them, and not trying to do too much. You don't want to be everything to everybody, or you're going to have a lot of waste and inefficiency, and that's going to, you're not going to be effective at delivering those products. You're going to have a lot of spoilage and waste, and those are things that make it inefficient. So, doing less and building from there, and just getting feedback. A lot of people feel like you build a menu the first time, and that's the one you're going to run with forever, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. I've been opening restaurants for 20 years in some of the best food cities in the country, and I will tell you that the opening menu, 70 to 80% of it never lasts more than a month. You'll spend months, maybe a year or two, developing menus in some restaurants, and once customers come in and start dining, they're going to tell you what they like, and you need to react to that. So, the process is great, but the biggest thing I always tell people is be open to hearing feedback and customer, satisfaction, and then evolve to that, because you may have it all wrong. You never know, or your customers may evolve over time, and you need to be ready and willing to engage in that. So it's always a constant, interaction with the customer.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for a long time. I'm sure you made a lot of good decisions in that time, but I'm sure you've also made some mistakes along the way. So based on your experience and your learnings, are there any particular do's and don'ts when it comes to developing an F&B program for, say, an outdoor hospitality project?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is don't focus on being a convenience. Don't try to say, well, people need something, so what's the least nuisance for me to provide for them, right? Like, what's going to give me the least headache? Don't look at it from that point of view. We always try to focus on intention, right? If you give a little bit of thought and effort into what you're doing or what your customers might want, you're going to be much more successful. And start small and iterate. These are all things we're talking about. Like, don't try to do too little and don't try to do too much. Just try to be intentional with your efforts. I think that's the best way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. And John, I think you're probably going to get a few inquiries off the back of this podcast, because not only have you explained really well what goes into a F&B program for something like this, you've also explained just how much there is to learn and to take into account, and it's something that really requires sort of expert help with. So if someone is listening to this, they want you to help them develop an F&B program for their project, how can you help them, first of all, and then second of all, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. So as I mentioned, like from how can we help them, we feel like we're a full service operation. So we can take you all the way from site planning. We can help you if you're going through your cap raise and you want to understand what kind of impact food and beverage could have for the overall ROI of a resort. We think that's really valuable. And I think we mentioned some of the numbers earlier that you can see some significant lift from a revenue model if you have food and beverage involved. So that could significantly shorten your ROI window. So we definitely think we can be involved early on and take you all the way through, integrating with your master planning, your architects and engineers on that process, to design development of the food and beverage all the way through, like we mentioned, the fun stuff, R&D, testing. We can stop there and we can give you what we consider an operational playbook. And it could be everything you need. You've designed the space, you've got the menus, you've got the vendor relationships, everything that you might need. And you might say, okay, great, we're going to go do this ourselves, or we're going to manage it ourselves. Thank you. And that could be the end of the relationship. We could also then launch the program with you and go through kind of the opening phases, maybe a few months. And then we can also stay on, for the long term. If it is something where you don't want to have a significant amount of involvement in the day-to-day operations, we have full service capability of managing that project for you long term. If you want to partially manage it, like maybe you just want to stay involved and you need some of our services, maybe it's HR, maybe it's day-to-day ops, we can handle that as well. So we feel like we can kind of take you, we can kind of hold your hand all the way through it and let you go when you feel comfortable, or we can stay involved over the long term.
Amazing. And what's your contact details for people to get in touch?
Sure. So you can find us at outboundkitchen.com, and we're on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So
amazing. Well, thank you, John. It's been an absolute pleasure. So much good information there. So many learnings that I've learned. I didn't realize quite how much goes into food and beverage for a glamping operation. So thank you. As I say, I'm pretty sure you're going to get some inquiries off the back of that, which would be great. I'm hoping to work with you on some projects coming up as well, which will be really exciting. And maybe we can do a case study of that at some point. But for now, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it.
All right, sounds great. Look forward to it. Thanks again for having me.
No problem.